Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to another installment in our commentary on Kitab at-Tawheed, al-Imam Mujaddid al-Muslih Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And we have reached chapters 38 and 39 of the work. And hopefully we'll get a chance to comment on both of those chapters because they are somewhat related. So the first of these two chapters is the chapter which the Imam entitled Babu Man Ata'a al-Ulama wal-Umara في تحريم ما أحل الله أو تحليل ما حرمه الله فقد اتخذهم أربابا من دون الله. So the first chapter he entitled it the chapter indicating that the one who obeys the scholars and rulers in their forbidding what Allah has permitted and permitting what Allah has forbidden has taken them as lords besides Allah. And the second chapter he entitled it or he actually used a verse. He said Babu and he mentioned a verse from the Quran. But if you look at the series of verses that he cited, as well as some of the other texts that he cited, we can call that chapter Babu Wujub Tahkim Shar'illah, the chapter indicating the obligation to seek the judgment of and judge in accordance with Allah's law. And so you can see that these two are kind of related because they both talk about where we should turn to for guidance and for final determination in the matters, right? And both of these chapters are a continuation of, as we said, this section with this overarching theme of issues or matters or things which are incompatible with at-Tawheed. And more specifically, within that overarching section, or that section with that overarching theme, is this series of chapters where the Imam focuses on al-a'mal al-qalbiyah, the actions of the heart, emphasizing both their importance and their relationship to at-Tawheed, that the heart plays a very significant role in achieving the objective of the Muslim to be a monotheist and to single out Allah and make him the sole object of worship. And the reason why we say that this is related to the concept of Tawheed, these two chapters, as we're going to see. And specifically, they are related to the actions of the heart, is because without question it is from a Tawheed to believe in one's heart that one, Allah and His Messenger are the only ones entitled to absolute obedience and blind following, at-Taqleed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger are the only ones who we are permitted to follow blindly. And what does that mean? That means that whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger say something, they tell us to believe in something, or they tell us to do something, they don't have to provide us with supporting proof. They don't have to tell us why we should do this, why it's important to do this, why we have to believe in it, etc. and so on. But rather, we have to believe in it on its face, simply because Allah said, or His Messenger said. And this is the meaning of the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in which He says, talking about the Messenger of Allah specifically, He says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. He says, nay, by your Lord, O Muhammad, they do not believe until they make you until they make you the sole judge in all decisions or all affairs amongst them. And then they find no resistance or opposition in their hearts to what you have decided, but rather they accept it and surrender to it completely. Meaning that what? We blindly follow what the Messenger said, and we don't ask questions, we don't question the Messenger of Allah, etc. Also, blind following Allah and His Messenger means that we don't have to be able to make sense of what they order us to do before we follow it. It doesn't have, we can't say, for example, well, I don't understand. That doesn't make sense to me. And use that as an excuse not to carry out what we've been asked to carry out or to execute. And this is the meaning of the statement of Ali radiallahu anhu, in which he said, لو كان الدين بالرأي لكان أسفل الخف أولى لكان أسفل الخف أولى بالمسح من أعلى ولكني رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يمسح على أعلى خفيه. So in that hadith, the Prophet, Ali ibn Abi Talib, in that author, he said, if the religion was based upon what is rational or reason all the time, we just base what's right and what's wrong on what makes sense to what? Our minds. Then when we go to wipe over our foot coverings, right? We would wipe what? The bottom, because that's the part that gets dirty, is exposed to dirt. But he said, we saw the Messenger of Allah, when he would wipe over his foot coverings, wiping over the top. And so this is an indication that when it comes to religion and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His Messenger, have taught us, we follow it blindly, and we don't say, well, I'm only going to do it if what? If it makes sense to me. I'm only going to do it if Allah can prove it to me that I should do it. But they are entitled to this blind following, and they're the only ones entitled to this blind following. The second thing is that we have to believe in our hearts is that no one should legalize what Allah has outlawed or outlaw what He has legalized. If this is something prohibited in the deen of Allah, we have to believe it's wrong for someone to say or to believe that something which Allah has made illegal is legal, or something which Allah has made something Allah has made illegal is legal, or something He made legal is illegal. And there's actually a hadith, the hadith of Al-Bara ibn Azib, in which he mentioned that once he came across, or he was passed, or he was met in the streets of Al-Madinah by one of his uncles. And that uncle was carrying a liwa, he was carrying a banner, and the Prophet, it was his custom to give people a banner if they were going to go and perform some job for him, some expedition for him, some mission for him. And so he asked his uncle about this liwa, about this flag that he'd been given, and the task that the messenger had tasked him with. So he said, Amrani, and Nabi sallallahu he said, Ba'athani Rasulullah sallallahu an adrib unaqa rajulin tazawwaja imra'ata abihi. He said, the Prophet has appointed me to go and execute a man who married the wife of his father. Married the wife of his father. Tayyib, in Islam, is it permissible for a son to marry the wife of his father? So for example, if it's not his mother, let's say it's his stepmother, right? Okay, they're not, so she's not his mother, but his father was married to her, okay? And they were married, let's say, for years, meaning that at some point they were intimate. And so his father passes away, or his father divorces her. Can the son now marry her? This is illegal in Islam, right? This is illegal. If you marry a woman, what is marriage at its core? Okay, it's a trust, but what's the difference between a man having a girlfriend and a man having a wife? So when a man marries a woman, he legalizes that what? That physical relationship. Is that not so? Are we all on the same page? That's what marriage does. At the core of it, marriage legalizes what? One partner for the other. Legalizes that physical relationship. So when this man married, he didn't take her as a girlfriend. When he married the wife of his father, what did he do in the process? He made legal what Allah made what? Illegal. And the Prophet ﷺ sent this man, Al-Harith ibn Amr, he sent him to what? Not just to kill him, but he even said, وَخَمِّسْ مَالَهُ. He said basically, and take his wealth the same way you would take the wealth of an enemy that you cut down on the battlefield. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he said this is an indication that the man was a disbeliever. Because even if you, for example, let's say a man committed another sin. Let's say a man, for example, he committed the sin of murder and he was a Muslim and he killed another Muslim. And so it's up to his family to determine if they're going to take his blood or take the blood money. So they decide to have him killed. That man who gets killed, can you take his wealth? Can you take possession of all his property? No, he committed a crime, and the punishment was crime was execution. But if he became a disbeliever, if he apostated, his wealth becomes what? It becomes halal. You guys see that? So Ibn Taymiyyah said it's an indication that the person became a disbeliever. How did he become a disbeliever? Because he illegalized what Allah made illegal. You guys see that? So I say all that to say is that at the very least, legalizing what Allah has made illegal is haram. But it can reach the level of what? Of disbelief, okay? So this is something that we have to believe in our hearts, and it's wrong to do that. It's wrong to legalize what Allah has made illegal. And it's wrong to make illegal what Allah has legalized. Number 3, we have to believe in our hearts it's wrong to follow anyone, regardless of their status, in their permitting of what Allah has prohibited. We have to believe it's wrong for someone to be appointed and to be looked at and seen as someone who, because they're so special, because they're so knowledgeable, because they've made so many amazing contributions to the Muslim world, that somehow, some way, this person now, we can obey them instead of Allah. We can obey them in spite of Allah. It's wrong to believe. We have to believe in our hearts it's wrong, right? As as-Saafiy, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said in the one author, he said, أجمع المسلمون على من استبانت له سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يكن له ليدعها لقول أحد كائنا من كان. He said the Muslims are unanimously agreed that it is prohibited for any person, once what is right, what is lawful, what is prescribed, the teachings of Allah and His Messenger have reached them, and it becomes clear to them what they have said. It's wrong for them to what? To abandon them for the statement of someone else, no matter who that is. And we're going to actually see an ethic to this effect shortly. The fourth thing we have to believe, brothers and sisters, is that it is from at-Tawheed to believe that we're required to seek the judgment of Allah and His Messenger in all matters, whether those matters are religious or secular, and to judge in accordance with Allah's laws in all matters, whether religious or secular, which means that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken about anything, whether the issue is religious or secular, we should what? Actively seek. Whatever the issue is, we should actively seek to see. Has Allah said anything? Has the Messenger said anything? And once we know what they have said, if they've spoken on the issue, we should actively what? Follow what they said, and we're not allowed to what? To abandon what they said to follow something else. And this is the meaning of the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He said, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا مُبِينًا. He said, it is not for a believing man or a believing woman. Once Allah and His Messenger have decided an affair, they've spoken on a matter, okay? It's not permissible for them to have a choice, right? To have a choice, to think that they're at liberty to say, I don't want to follow that. I don't agree with that. I have a different view on that, right? And whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger after knowing what is right and what they have said, then that person has indeed gone clearly astray. And so this is important for us because we live in a modern age, and we live in a society where people feel free to look at every issue and make a determination that suits them, given the times and given their circumstances. And so we live in a time where people debate whether or not same-sex marriage is okay. They debate whether or not these surgeries that people do to change their sex is okay. We live in a time where people debate whether or not abortion is okay, right? And you'll find many Muslims entering these debates and inclining toward opinions which are out of phase with what Islam has said. Why? because they're impacted by the environment around them. They hear people's arguments. They find those arguments convincing. And they don't even do what? They never look to even see what Allah has said. Or they know what Allah said and they start saying things like, A'udhu Billah, these laws are archaic. These laws are outdated. These laws are backwards. These laws are foolish. We have to be forward thinking. They say things like this. And so we have to believe in our heart that that's wrong. Once Allah, if there's any issue before us, we want to know what Allah said. We want to know what His Messenger said. And once we know what Allah and His Messenger said, we want to know what? We should want to follow what they said. We have to believe we are obligated to follow what they said. طيب, so the Imam, he brings these two chapters. And what motivates him to bring these two chapters? So the first one, you look at it and you say, this chapter is dealing with what? The concept of at-Tawheed, blind following. Which usually when we think about taqleed, we think about the arena of fiqh and how people have a tendency to blindly follow these imams or the leading scholars of Islamic jurisprudence, al-madhahib, how they tend to blindly follow them in matters of what? Of fiqh. So people will say, I'm Hanafi. And so they follow all of the rulings of the so-called Hanafi madhab when it comes to fiqh, right? What water is pure, what water is not pure? What are the things you can eat and what things you can't eat? How do you pray? Where do you hold your hands in prayer, right? How many phrases are there in the adhan? You got these issues, you'll find them, whatever the Hanafi madhab says, that's what I say because I'm Hanafi. They just what? Blindly follow, irrespective of what? Of what the evidence indicates. So typically this is when we think about the concept of taqleed, this is what we think about. So why would the Imam mention it in the book of what? Of at-Tawheed, a book talking about monotheism. And the answer is because are twofold. One of them is that what is one of the primary reasons why people do anything wrong? Ignorance is one, huh? They're taught wrong. Okay, ignorance, easier. Anything else? Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Blind following. And that includes a shirk. A lot of people who fall into idolatrous practices and idolatrous beliefs are just doing what? What they see other people doing. Follow the leader, blind following. Or there's some imam who everybody respects and considers to be the second coming of, second coming or whoever, right? Right? Second coming of Ibn Taymiyyah, second coming of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And so they look up to this person and that person does these things. Or supports these things, or promotes these things. And so blindly following them, they do that. And so one of the reasons why the Imam brought this chapter in this book of Kitab at-Tawheed was basically to warn us against the blind following that people will blind following that people will use to justify their acts of shirk. This can't be wrong because Imam so-and-so. This can't be wrong because Imam such and such, right? But what if the dalil says otherwise? You have to follow the dalil and you can't ignore the dalil and follow so-and-so. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason is because sometimes blind following itself is a shirk. Sometimes you can follow someone and believe that someone is so special. They are so holy. They are so sacred in and of themselves that they deserve to be what? To be obeyed, even if it means disobeying Allah, which is a shirk, right? Which is a shirk. So that's another reason. The second chapter that he brought, which is the one about the obligation to seek the judgment of Allah and to judge in accordance with Allah's laws, is because the Imam, he faced the challenge that many of us face today. And that is, he was forced to deal with people who abandon and depart from seeking judgment in accordance with Allah's judgment, and instead judge in accordance with secular, tribal, or local laws, or these self-imposed regulations. People have a tendency to do what? To say they impose on themselves laws and rules and strict regulations which Allah hasn't imposed upon them or the messenger. Or they have these cultural traditions, the things that they've done or the people have done in their societies and handed those down. Or the social norms, what people are doing nowadays. And people will turn to those instead of turning to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. This is something that existed during the time of the Imam, and it's something that exists nowadays. And so the Imam wants to what? Address that. And he wants to encourage the true believers to acknowledge that we are all, without exception, obligated to rule ourselves and those under our charge, and judge ourselves and judge others and judge things in accordance with Allah's law. This is what the Imam wants to remind us. This is a part of what? Part of faith. It's an intrinsic part of faith. And this is important because, again, we live in an environment where if we want to, we can not judge ourselves, not judge others, not judge things by what Allah has revealed. So, for example, in terms of things, behavior. We can look at certain behaviors in this society, which are legal and lawful behaviors, and we can choose to what? Legalize them if we want to, or consider them okay, like we talked about same-sex marriage and those types of things. We can deem those what? Those okay in this society, and so we're being tested. Another test that we have is that, for example, the laws in this country as it relates to marriage, as it relates to divorce, as it relates to custody, in the case of divorce, custody of children, right? And those types of things, division of property, those types of things. They're very different from the laws of Islam. And you find many Muslims, when it comes to those types of issues, will turn to what? The secular law, which favors them, as opposed to following the law of Islam, which is fair. You guys see that? So, for example, I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's not uncommon when people see that they're not going to get what they want. They're going to get what's fair, but they're not going to get what they want. Is that they'll ignore what Islam says and do what? And go to the secular law to get something that they're not really entitled to. And again, the Imam is emphasizing that we have to be very, very careful if we're Muslims, if we're believers, in turning away from Allah's law and turning toward what? The laws of the tribe, the country, the land, the civil, the secular civil systems, etc. So let's look at this first chapter a little bit more closely. And he begins it actually by referencing, without stating it openly, referencing an ayah from Surah at-Tawbah, the 31st ayah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ وَالْمَسِيحَ ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ. They have taken their rabbis and monks as well as the Messiah, son of Mary, as lords besides Allah. And how did they do that? In the hadith of Adi ibn Hatim, the Prophet explained, because Adi ibn Hatim was a Christian and he converted to Islam. And so when he heard the Prophet reciting this verse, he objected. He said, Ya Rasulullah, that's a little bit over the top. That's a little much. We didn't worship them. So what came to his mind was, when you say worship, you mean like we would prostrate to them, we would bow to them. We would, sacrifice animals for their sake, and we didn't do that. That's what he's thinking. So the Prophet said, did you not legalize the things that they made legal, even though Allah had made them illegal? And did you not make illegal the things that Allah had made legal, simply because they said so? He said, Bala, of course we did that. We had to obey them. They're our priests, right? So the Prophet said, Tilka ibadatuhum. In this way, you worship them. In this way, you worship them. And so the Imam took that or alluded to that in his title of the chapter. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, those people who obey others in a tahleel wa tahreem, in legalizing and declaring illegal, or permitting and prohibiting, he says the people who do that, they're one of two categories. The first one is the one who someone says that they look up to, or they admire, or they consider to be an iconic figure. That person legalizes the illegal, or declares illegal the legal. And they obey them in that, believing that now this illegal thing has become legal, and this legal thing has become illegal. For example, let's say that someone said, times have changed, and there's no harm if Muslims eat pork. He makes this fatwa. He says pork is lawful. It's lawful for you, right? If you slaughter it, as we slaughter other animals, it's lawful for you to eat it. And so a person believes now that pork is what? It's lawful. He said the person who does that has disbelieved and apostated because he's guilty of a form of kufr which is known as istihlal, legalizing the prohibited. Just like that guy who married the wife of his father. You guys see that? طيب, that's al-istihlal. He made legal, he believed that the illegal was what? Was legal. طيب, he said the second category are those who follow. So somebody says to them, let's start with their father. Their father says, marijuana has been legalized in this country. This is where we live. And there's no harm if we smoke marijuana, right? As long as we smoke it at times that we won't be high during prayer times. He tells his son that. He said, we're going to go down now to the place where they sell, I forget the name of the dispensary or dispensary, right? Oh, you knew that right off your, you knew what that was. Alhamdulillah, I'm just joking with you. All right, so we're going to go out to the dispensary and we're going to get, some, and we're going to smoke it. And the son smokes it. But he smokes it believing what? It's haram. He believes it's what? It's haram, but he goes along with his father because it's his father, right? Doesn't want to upset him, doesn't want to make him angry, is afraid of him, whatever. But he believes in his heart it's haram. That person is sinful, but he's not a disbeliever. He's just like any other person who does something wrong, knowing it's wrong, admitting it's wrong, but does it. You guys see the difference? So Ibn Taymiyyah says there are two categories. The one who yastahil, he considers it legal, that person has disbelieved, and the person who considers it haram, but does it anyway, following, just kind of going along, that person is something haram, but is not a disbeliever. طيب, okay. Before we get into the chapter itself, I want to talk about the concept of a taqleed. So first of all, what is a taqleed? Taqleed we translate as blind following, and basically what that means is when you follow the opinion of someone else without knowing the evidence, without knowing whatever supporting evidence they have to support the opinion that they've adopted. And sometimes you don't know the evidence. Sometimes you know it's not supported by any evidence. They have no evidence. Sometimes you know that it contradicts the credible evidence. And in all those cases, you're guilty of a taqleed, and some of them are worse than what? Worse than others. Obviously, if you know that it contradicts the evidence and you follow it anyway, that's obviously the worst one. We're going to talk about that a little in just a second. All right. So when you follow the opinion of someone without knowing the evidence, or knowing that they have no supporting evidence, or knowing even worse that the evidence that they have contradicts the more credible evidence, these are all examples of a taqleed, blind following. طيب, so now when you look at this taqleed, the ruling of it is going to depend on what? The circumstances. So there's one type of taqleed which is unanimously prohibited. It's wrong, it's illegal for a Muslim to what? To commit this act or this form of taqleed. And that's where you follow someone knowingly contradicting the Quran and Sunnah. You follow someone knowingly contradicting the Quran and the Sunnah. So for example, I'm trying to think of an example that happens in Muslim communities.
What about the situation with the Asul and Rasulullah?
Which one?
The Asul.
The Asal?
Yes.
Talking about when he told him my brother's stomach hurts?
No.
Which one?
When the mother of the believers, radiallahu anha, said that his breath would stink because of the honey that he had ate from one of his other wives. And so he had said that he was never going to eat honey again. And if I'm not mistaken, Allah in the tafsir said that, why do you make illegal what I made?
What Allah made illegal. Okay. A little different, but I definitely see where you're going with that. But obviously in that case, the Prophet ﷺ was making it illegal for himself, not illegal for the ummah. And he was doing it because he was so sensitive to what? To how he smelled, right? How he smelled. But I do see where you're going with that, but I'll give you a different one. So as far as like this first one, which is when you blindly follow someone in something which clearly goes against the Quran and Sunnah. Let's take the example of imposing a dowry on the girl's family. Imposing a dowry on the girl's family. You guys understand that? Mm-hmm. So basically, when it comes time to get married, the boy goes over to the girl's house and has his hand out. Right? Like, if you want me to marry your daughter, then you have to give me all these gifts, and you have to pay me this much money, and you have to so and so and so and so. Obviously, this is a cultural thing that people do in a certain culture, and those people were not Muslims at first, and then they became Muslims. And when they became Muslims, they brought this cultural baggage into the religion with them. And so when you know that this is wrong, but you say, well, Sheikh so-and-so says it's okay, that type of blind following would be unanimously prohibited. Okay, you can't impose a dowry on the girl when Islam has imposed the dowry on the male, right? On the male. Second one, or the second category is a taqleed, which is unanimously permitted. Unanimously permitted. And this is when a lay person blindly follows a legitimate scholar because he's unable to what? To do the research himself. And we're going to talk about the details of that and the conditions of that and what that should look like a little later, okay? But it's permitted, unanimously permitted for a person who's a lay person, doesn't have the ability to do research, doesn't have the ability to study, right? Is incapable. A lay person, like a layman, like an average common person, right? So he asks a scholar, and then what? Takes that scholar's opinion as what? As his guide. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرٍ كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. So he asks the person and takes that. There's no problem in that. That's permitted. Last but not least is there's one that's debated. The scholars debate and they differ about whether or not it's allowed or not allowed. That's what, if a person is capable of doing research, but because of circumstances, there's no time. It's like an urgent situation. He has a person who he's trying to wash his body and prepare him for a funeral. And that person, half of his body has got burned, right? And if they wash it, it's going to do what? It's going to make a mess, and it's going to be hard to shroud. And the shroud is, once they wash it, it's going to start to, bodily fluids will start to secrete, and it'll ruin the shroud. It'll stain through the shroud. They're worried about that, and the person doesn't have time to research. What do you do in a case like this? Do you just make tayammum? Do you not wash him at all? He doesn't know, so he calls someone. And they say, wash the part that you can wash and make tayammum for the part that you can't wash. You guys see that? So he takes that information at face value because he doesn't have the time to do the research himself. That form of taqleed, most of the scholars say is what? Is permitted. Even though this person, if he had the time, he could do the research himself. Tayyib. All right. So now people, when it comes to taqleed, there are three types of people. One of them is al-mujtahid. The mujtahid is the one who possesses those tools and those skills to be able to study the adillah, to weigh between the adillah, to extract rulings from the adillah, and to draw what? Conclusions, and to adopt an opinion, right? Adopt an opinion. And he has that quality or the skill of deductive reasoning, right? He has that ability. That's one level. The second level is what? Al-muttabi'. This is the person who he has the ability to study what? These opinions. He has the ability to study the opinions. He knows something about what is a valid opinion versus what is an invalid opinion. So he can do what? Weigh between the opinions. And he can study not just the opinions, but also study to find out what were the evidences provided by the scholars to support those opinions. And so he adopts one of those opinions based upon the evidence. That person is what they call muttabi', a follower. You guys see that? A follower. And last but not least is the muqallid, the person who what? He blindly follows the opinion of the scholar because he doesn't have what? The qualities of a mujtahid, the one who has the ability to do deductive reasoning, and he doesn't have the qualities of al-muttabi', the person who what? I can take these opinions, put them all together, look at them in detail and say, hey, this is the right one based upon the evidence and how you're supposed to make these conclusions. Tayyib. Last but not least, before we get to the nusus, is that Al-Muqallid, the blind follower. Al-Muqallid. So you have Mujtahid, the one who does deductive reasoning. Al-Muttabi', the one who can look at the opinions of the scholars and choose one based upon the evidence. He has that skill or ability. And last one is Muqallid, the blind follower. طيب, one last thing about the blind follower is he has to realize he is not a scholar. And just because he consulted a scholar and the scholar gave him a verdict, he cannot go around now and start telling other people, hey, you have to do this because this scholar said, which is a big mistake that Muslims make. You guys see that? That now.
Is that kind of like how you see a lot of times, especially in some of our more, in some communities where like one imam or somebody who's in a position of leadership will say, don't take from this person anymore. Scholars said that this person is a deviant or whatever.
Mhm.
Like, is that kind of along the same line that we shouldn't really take the statements? Like, you know, you'll see a lot of times with certain imams and certain masters,
Mhm.
don't take from this brother if he's a deviant.
Mhm.
The scholar said, you know, like, what is the position as far as that for the people who are just lay people?
Okay. If I'm understanding you correctly, that definitely falls in that category. You have people who they'll call someone or hear somebody say something on the tape. They'll call someone, they'll say, hey, I want to ask you about so-and-so. He says, oh, so-and-so's bad. Don't listen to him. Now notice, at no point did he say so-and-so's bad because ... You guys see that? See the difference between so-and-so's bad, don't listen to him, and hang up the phone? That's just what? That's his opinion, not supported by evidence. Now, if I'm a lay person and I don't know any better, and I trust the credibility of the scholar himself, he's reputable, he's credible, I can say, you know what? I'm not taking from that person. What I can do is now go to other people and say, hey, you can't take from him. Why not? Because so-and-so said. What was his evidence? Doesn't matter. So-and-so said. So then the person continues to take from him and people start saying, oh, then you're a bad person. You're a deviant. You're this. That's wrong. Because the blind follower cannot take the verdict he got without knowing the evidence and then start doing what? Clubbing people over the head with it. Exactly. Clubbing people over the head with it. You can't do that. And that's whether it's related to people or it's whether it's related to what? To rulings. You guys see that? So for example, somebody might ask somebody about stocks, right? Stocks and bonds or whatever. And get a fatwa that, yeah, just avoid it. Just avoid it. Now the person, when he says, hey, what do you think about stocks and bonds? What do you think about investing in such and so and so and so? He says, you know what? Just avoid all that. There's a lot of questionable things in that and just avoid it. Hangs up the phone. Now that person, he trusts the person who said that. So he accepts it. And he just says, well, you know what? I'm not going to do stocks and bonds. I'll find other ways to what? To grow my wealth. He can't go now and hear people talking about what? Hey, what do you think about dog coin or whatever they got, right? Think about investing in that, right? AMC, I think it's about to blow up. What do you think about that? And he says, oh, you can't do that because I called so-and-so. And they said, just avoid it. There's a lot of what? Questionable things. And start clubbing people over the head with what? With the verdict he got, which is based purely upon blind following. You guys see that? Okay, so we can't do that. So you can take it for yourself, but you can't turn around now and give religious verdicts based upon the blind following. And all you have with you is so-and-so said. That's not a dalil. As Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, كلام العلماء يحتج لها ولا يحتج به. He said the statements of the scholars need to be supported by evidence. They are not evidence in and of themselves. People have to stop saying, this is haram. Why? Because Ibn Taymiyyah said. It's haram because Ibn Qayyim said. That's wrong. Right? That's wrong. طيب. All right. So now, let's look at some of the things that the Imam shared. Let's look at some of the things he shared. طيب. So he starts out with this athar of Ibn Abbas, who said, يوشك أن تنزل عليكم حجارة من السماء أقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وتقولون قال أبو بكر وعمر. He says, I fear that stones are soon to descend upon you from the heavens. I say to you, Allah and His Messenger said, and you say to me, Abu Bakr and Umar said. Now, let's reflect on this for a second. The people that he's talking to are people who likely had questions about the religion, and they went to Abu Bakr and Umar and asked them and got a particular verdict from them. Or they became aware that these were their verdicts. They might not have gotten them from themselves directly, but they heard that Umar said this, Abu Bakr said that, or this is what they did, right? This is how they ruled the people, etc. And Abu Bakr and Umar, are they ordinary people? No, they're no ordinary people, to the point that the Prophet said in the hadith collected by Muslim, he said, إِن يُطِعِ النَّاسُ أَبُو بَكْرَ وَعُمَرَ يَرْشُدُوا. If the people obey Abu Bakr and Umar, they'll be guided. This is the status the Prophet gave Abu Bakr and Umar. They're not ordinary people. They're people who usually what they say is right. So the people, obviously, they had every right to believe that if they say something, it must be what? It must be what Allah and His Messenger said. You guys see that? But even then, Ibn Abbas, he's telling the people something. He's giving them a fatwa based upon what? The hadith, based upon the evidence, based upon what Allah and His Messenger said. And the people are responding, but Abu Bakr said, but Umar said. And he gets angry and he says, you know, let me step to the side because I fear that stones are going to rain down upon you from the heavens. I'm telling you, Allah and His Messenger said, you're going to respond with Abu Bakr and Umar. What is he basically telling? He's telling us that basically, look, it doesn't matter who the person is. It could be Abu Bakr and it could be Umar. And these people are what? They are worthy of being followed. If you're going to blind follow anybody, blind follow them. But he's saying even then, if Allah and His Messenger have said something and it contradicts what they said, then you have to do what? You have to follow what Allah and His Messenger said. No one is entitled to be blind followed no matter how special they are. And this effort is azim because whoever you mention, and there's some great people, past and present, whoever you mention, none of them will be equal to what? Abu Bakr and Umar. You guys see that? And he's saying you can't even blind follow them. So if that's the case, you can't blind follow Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn al-Qayyim or Ibn Uthaymeen or Al-Albani or Ibn Baz. You see that? You can't blind follow anyone if they're contradicting the what? The evidence. ثم بعد ذلك, he follows it with the statement of Ahmad bin Hanbal, who he said, عجبت لقوم عرفوا الإسناد وصحته يذهبون إلى رأي سفيان. He says, I am astonished by people who know the chain of transmission and its authenticity, but nevertheless follow the opinion of Sufyan al-Thawri. Even though Allah says, فَلْيَحْذِرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Let those who oppose Allah's messenger's command beware lest some fitna, disbelief or affliction befall them, or a painful torment be inflicted on them. Ahmed goes on to say, do you know what the fitna is? Al-fitna is a shirk. Maybe the rejection of some of his words would cause one to have doubt and deviation in his heart and thereby be destroyed. A few things here just to clarify the athar. So first of all, he mentioned Sufyan, and as the author or the translator clarified, what he meant was Sufyan al-Thawri. And Sufyan al-Thawri is this very, very highly respected religious authority with a very large following and a stellar reputation during the early period, right? He is very, very well respected, lauded, extolled, exalted by the people. And because he had this stellar reputation, because he was such a big scholar, because he was so knowledgeable, many people followed him blindly. They just blindly followed him. Whatever he said, they did. And some of them were very fanatical in their following, in their blind following of his opinions and his school of thought. And one of the things it's teaching us is that when you have an affinity for a person, you guys have heard of something called affinity bias, right? When you like somebody, your opinion or your vision can be blurred. Blurred by what? By your affinity for them. I like this person, and so they're what? They're right. So let's say, for example, you have two people that you know, and both of them are scholarly. They're academes, they're knowledgeable, they're very studious. And one of them you're very, very close to and fond of, and one you're not so fond of. So when those two people come and you're discussing something about the religion, and they take two opposing views on the issue, you say, yeah, I agree with you. A lot of times you agree with that person, not because their evidence is more convincing, but because what? Because of that affinity, right? Your vision becomes blurred. And so many people, because they loved him so much and they had so much respect for him, they would just blindly follow his opinions. They became fanatical in their following his opinions, even though They weren't always supported by the evidence. Because Sufyan al-Thawri came from, or he was from, the area of Al-Kufa. And Al-Kufa was a place where there was a lot of people who kind of inclined toward what they call madhab al-ra'i. The madhab where they make a lot of ijtihad, even though there's texts that are present on the issue. They would do what? They would make ijtihad and offer their what? Their opinion. They would reason a lot. And so he was influenced by that. I'm not saying he was completely like those people, what they call ahlul ra'i, the people of what? Of opinions, or the opinionated people, or the people who what? Who reason too much, even though there's what? Texts that speak about those issues. But he was influenced by that. And so sometimes he would what? He would have opinions which weren't consistent with the evidence. So Ahmed, he made this statement that look, sometimes he has statements, Sufyan al-Thawri, ma'a jalalat qadrihi, even though he's what? This great scholar, he has opinions which aren't consistent with the evidence. And I'm astonished by people who know they have enough knowledge, because they said, ajibtu li qawmin ya'rifun al-isnad, or arafu al-isnad. I'm amazed or astonished by people who what? They have the ability to do the research. And they know the hadith, but they ignore the hadith and follow what? The opinion of Sufyan, right? So basically what the Imam is saying emphatically is that this blind following in the face of what evidence is absolutely prohibited. We just can't do it. Okay? All right, the last thing he closes with, and I want to do both the chapters, but we won't. We'll just finish this one. I have a couple notes on this subject, and then we'll close out with that if there's any questions or whatever. But he closes with the hadith of Adi ibn Hatim, which we've mentioned a few times throughout the commentary. And that's the hadith where we talked about the Prophet read the ayah from Surah at-Tawbah, and Adi objected and said, we didn't worship them, O Messenger of Allah. And the Prophet said, didn't you legalize what they made illegal? And didn't you make illegal what they made legal? Didn't you legalize what they made? Did you legalize what they made legal? And did you make illegal what they made illegal? And he said yes. And he said, وَتِلْكَ إِبَادَتُهُمْ. And basically this hadith shows that absolute obedience and blind following, at-Tawheed, can reach a point where it is considered worship and a type of what? Idolatry. To the point that the Prophet said, by obeying them, absolutely, even though you knew that what they said was what they were making legal was illegal, according to Allah. And what they made illegal was legal according to Allah. When you did that, that's worship, right? That's worship, whether you realize it or not, too. So let me give you a few notes on the subject of a taqleed and al-futya, seeking verdicts, etc., which are very important for us to be mindful of, and some errors that people fall into as it relates to it. The first one is that a lay person who doesn't know should ask the people who know. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرٍ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. That's number one. Number two, if you notice the wording of the ayah, it's general. Ask the people of knowledge. It doesn't say the people of the Hanafi madhab, or the madhab that is pervading or prominent in your country. So we're supposed to ask anyone who's qualified, anyone who's capable of answering the question that we have. We should ask them regardless of what? Their madhab. Regardless of their madhab, as long as they have the requisite and necessary knowledge to answer the question. Number three, once we get the ruling, they ask us, is it permissible for a woman to trim her eyebrows or pluck her eyebrows? Is it permissible for a man to shave his beard? You ask them that question. You don't know. You ask them, and they say it's haram for a woman to pluck her eyebrows or remove her eyebrows. It's prohibited for a man to shave his beard. Once we get that ruling, we're supposed to what? Follow it. And we're not at liberty to say, I didn't really like your answer. Right? I didn't really like your answer. Because what will be the purpose, what will be the point of Allah saying, ask the people of knowledge, if we're at liberty to what? To ignore what they said. You see what I'm saying? So Allah wants us to follow them if they're really knowledgeable, if we believe that they're credible, follow what they say. Tayyib. Number four, it is sinful to pursue verdicts that suit our desires. And this relates to number five, which is, it is sinful to pit one scholar against another, or to seek to cancel out or discredit one verdict by what? by seeking another one. طيب. So what some people do is they'll, for example, go and they'll ask, I remember there was this big discussion about, suppose a woman wants to go get her hair done. And there's a particular shop that she wants to go to, and they will accommodate her the way Muslim women like to be accommodated. But the person who's going to do her hair is a transvestite. It's a man who believes he's a woman. Okay? So when you go in there, when the woman goes in, right? What does she see? For all intents and purposes, a woman. But then the person says, welcome.
How you doing?
Exactly. Welcome. I'm going to do your hair. What do you want done? And it's a man's voice, and it's clear that's what? It's a man, right? You know, I mean, it's clear it's a man, right? Big knuckles and everything, right? All right. So now the woman's like, oh, I don't know if I can do this or not. So she calls to find out, right? Call somebody that she respects, knowledgeable. Hey, this is the deal, so on and so forth. So that person says, no, you can't do that. Doesn't matter how much makeup they put on. Doesn't matter how many surgeries they have. That's a man. And you can't expose your hair to that man. Get out of that shop as soon as you can. She doesn't like that answer, right? This person comes highly recommended. They can do a really good job on the hair, and they're going to accommodate me. So she calls somebody else, and they say the same thing. Call somebody else. They say the same thing. Fourth person they call, what do you see? I see a woman. Khalas, go with what you see. So now all of a sudden, that's the right opinion. I asked 3 people and they said it's wrong, and they told me why it's wrong. And this person said it's right, and that's what I wanted to hear. So what? It's right. You guys see that? That's sinful. It's prohibited. It's called in Islam. The scholars of Islam call it tatabbu' al-rukhus. They call it tatabbu' al-rukhus, which basically means fatwa shopping, or looking for what? Looking for a concession. Pursuing a concession. Looking for the verdict that suits your desires. And the scholars of Islam said this is something prohibited bil ijma'. It's prohibited by agreement of the scholars that you go around fatwa shopping, pursuing the ruling that suits your desires. And there's a statement from Sulaiman at-Taymi, in which he said, لو أخذت بخطأ كل عالم لاجتمع فيك الشر كله. He was warning the people during his time. Some of the scholars went so far as to say, whoever does this, looking for fatwas, فقد تزندق. That person has become what? A hypocrite. That person has become a hypocrite. But Sulaiman at-Taymi, he has a statement, he says, listen, I'm warning you. If you go around looking for the mistakes or those questionable verdicts of different scholars, every scholar has one. Every scholar has a gaffe. Every scholar has an opinion that's totally wrong, right? And for example, Ibn Hazm, when he looked at the ahadith that talk about a man seeing a woman before they get married, the wording of the hadith in question is فَإِذَا اسْتَطَاعَ أَنْ يَنْظُرَ إِلَى مَا يَدْعُوهُ إِلَى نِكَاحِهَا فَلْيَفْعَلْ. If a man is able to look at that of a woman which will call him, invite him to marry her, then let him do it. So the word is general. It doesn't specify what he's supposed to look at, right? So the scholars, some of them said, they were very conservative. They said he can look at what? The face and the hands, best. Other scholars, the Hanabila in particular, they said he can look at sab'at al-a'ba. He can look at what? At 7 what? 7 body parts. The hair, the face, the neck. Okay, so Allah Tashwa, let me get it right. Let me start from the top down. Let me start from the top and go up. I'll get it right then. So the feet, 1, 2, right? The shins, 3, 4. The arms up to what? The elbows. 5, 6. And then what? And then the head. Right. So that's what they said. Ibn Hazm said it's general. So he could see her what? Naked. That's a gaffe. That's a gaffe. Nobody said that but what? But Ibn Hazm. Right? So I say that to say that every alim has a gaffe. If people go around looking for the gaffes, as Sulaiman at-Taymi said, he said, all of the what? All the bad things will be combined in you. There's some scholars who legalize alcohol by accident. Some scholars who legalize what? Music. Some scholars who legalize mut'ah, temporary marriage. You guys see that? So if you just go around looking for what? Those mistakes. Hey, you can see a Muslim, you can see a woman naked before you marry her. You can marry her for what? For 3 hours. You can drink alcohol while you guys are, on your honeymoon. And you can listen to music at the same time, right? You follow what I'm trying to say? So the point I'm trying to say is that this concept of a tatabur rukhas is something what? It's sinful, it's dangerous, and it puts you in a space where you're doing all the wrong things. Whereas if you look at the scholars themselves, they have what? One gaffe. So the one who legalized seeing a woman entirely nude, that's the only one. He didn't say you could marry her for 3 hours. He didn't say you could drink alcohol. He didn't say you could what? Listen to music. But you got these people who do what? Exactly. Collecting all those gaffes so they can do what? Make the religion, a joke, basically. Make mockery of the religion. Okay? All right. I got a couple more and I'm going to take you. Okay? All right. So the next one is it is sinful to ask a loaded question or to word a question in a way where you omit certain details to secure the desired response. A loaded question or a question where you do what? You omit certain details because what? I want to direct the scholar to give me what? The response I want so I can do what I want. So for example, a person goes to a learned person and says, is it okay if we invite some people over and feed them turkey? Person says, yeah, nothing wrong with that. You invite some people over and serve them turkey. So then the person leaves and says, yeah, I went and asked so-and-so. He said it's okay to celebrate Thanksgiving. Is that what he said? Is that what he said?
No.
But the person worded it in a way to get what? They didn't say, is it okay to celebrate Thanksgiving? No, can you invite some people over and serve them turkey? That's what they got a yes to. They omitted certain what? Key details to get what? To get the ruling that they wanted. That's what asking a loaded question was people do, right? So people will say, can I do this? And then they'll go around, I asked so-and-so. They say, you can't celebrate Thanksgiving. No, I asked so-and-so. I asked so-and-so. That's what people do. It's so sad. People will tell the story in a way to get the verdict that they want. And if they told the person everything, they wouldn't get that verdict, right? Person says, my son is acting up. Can I spank him? Can I chastise him? Let's say that, chastise, right? More general. He says, yeah, you can chastise him. If he's acting up, you can chastise him. So the father goes home and beats his son blue, beats him bloody. Has to be rushed to the emergency room. And he's in the emergency room and they're saying, how could you do this to your child? He said, yeah, I asked the imam of my masjid. He said it was okay. Did he say that? No. Do you think he even had in his mind that the father would do something like that? When you think chastise, you think what? Get a switch, right? Put him over your knee, get the belt. That's what you're thinking. He wasn't thinking that. But this is what people do. This is what we call asking a loaded question. Omitting certain key details to get what? To get what you want. To justify the things, the sick things that you want to do. Like last but not least, and this is important too, the ignorance of one scholar cannot be used to rebut the knowledge of another. One scholar doesn't know, another scholar knows. We say, oh, he never heard of that. So what this person said is wrong. No, the ignorance of one person can't be used to rebut the knowledge of somebody else. You guys see that? So for example, if you guys remember last week, we were talking about this concept of tashriq. Remember that? A tashriq, where you can have two intentions at the same time and get what? And get a double reward. As if you're doing two acts in one. We talked about that. Sometimes you want to get the reward of the dunya and the reward of the akhirah, or something beneficial from the dunya and beneficial from the akhirah. And sometimes you want what? Two rewards from what? Al-akhirah. And the example of two rewards from the akhirah is the one who they fast to get the reward for fasting, and also to get what? The shielding and protection of Allah from what? Committing the haram. You guys see that? Tayyib. So this concept of tashriq, some of you, that might have been the first time you ever heard of it. You might say, oh man, this brother's saying, I never heard that before. Let me go ask somebody. So you go and ask somebody. Say, what do you think about, have you ever heard anything about the tashriq? I never heard that before. See that, brother, what are you talking about? No, it doesn't work like that. You guys see that? The one who knows is never going to be considered the one who doesn't know is never going to give precedence over the one who what? Knows. Allah says in the Quran, هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. He says, are they equal? Those who know and those who don't know? They can never be equal, right? إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. Only those who reflect, only those who have sense will do what? Will reflect and say, come on, there's no way a person who doesn't know. So I say all that to say that these are some very important things, and we see errors that we see committed all the time as it relates to what? This concept of al-futya, asking, seeking verdict, al-istifta, and blind following. And so these are some very important points that we need to be mindful of and be careful of, and also warn other people about, because we see it a lot in Muslim communities. Tafadali.
I had a question. When you were saying some scholars say it's sinful for those last few things that you said the scholars say they're sinful, but
Hey.
not so much like Allah said. So when I hear that, like to say it's sinful, it's like I'm looking for something where Allah says that, or it would
MashaAllah.
the punishment of that, because I hear that a lot. You know, like
Hey.
how is it that the scholars can tell us what's punishable, or you know, where's the text or the
Wow.
what Allah says, what is the punishment to that?
Very valid question. Very good and valid question. So there's two things. One thing is that a lot of times when people say, the scholars say, they're quoting what the scholars have said, which is supported by the evidence without supporting the evidence, right? Or saying what the scholars said, knowing that they wouldn't have said it without being able to support it by evidence. Because saying that something is a sin is not something you can say unless you have evidence. That's the first thing. So that a lot of times when you hear that, but what you're saying is a very, very good point. We have to be careful, and we have to look beyond just what? The scholars, because a lot of people use that and they don't have the right academic integrity. So basically they want to scare us into doing something or not doing something. So they'll just say what? The scholars. And people, out of respect for the people of knowledge, will follow what they say when in reality there's nothing behind it, right? So that's a very good point that you made. But I'm just saying in general, like for example here we say the scholars say. And even when we said that, we said bil ijma', by agreement. So this is, which brings me to our second point, is that when the scholars say something haram, sinful, it could be sinful because Allah said, as you said. It could be sinful because the messenger said. It could also be sinful because what? The ummah or the scholars have agreed. Because one of the evidences that we use to base our religion on is the agreement of what? Of the scholars or the agreement of the ummah. So that's another tool that we have. And this particular thing, this tatabu al-rukhus, being sinful, according to the scholars, is by unanimity. They're agreed on this. And among the scholars who transmitted the ijma' to us is Ibn Hazm, transmitted the ijma', and also Ibn Abdul Barr in his book Jami' Bayan al-Ilm wa Fadli. And so we have these credible scholars from the past who collected for us the statements of the scholars and transmitted their agreement that this is what? Sinful. And so that becomes a hujjah. Not because we just pluck out of the air, the scholar said, but because what? They did the research and discovered there is no scholar who said otherwise. And so that becomes a hujjah, because this ummah will never agree upon falsehood. So if the scholars agree on something, we know it's what? It's from the deen. Go ahead.
Scholars say something is sinful, can they determine punishment for it as well?
No, they can't determine the punishment because the punishment is from the unseen. But what I will say is that when the scholars transmit or convey to us the ijma', that unanimity, they don't always tell us the dalil, the evidence. But we know that there's a dalil because there can't be an ijma' without a dalil. But we don't need the dalil to follow the ijma'. So make sure we distinguish between those two things. There is no ijma' without dalil. So when the scholars agreed on something, they agreed based upon what? Evidence. The ijma' reaches us from credible scholars. Like there are certain names you always see connected with al-ijma', like Ibn Rajab, Ibn Abdul Barr, Ibn al-Mundhir, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, An-Nawawi. I mean, Ibn Hajar. These are like the greatest scholars of Islam throughout different periods and different generations, and people who were extremely familiar with the statements of the scholars. They're qualified and capable of saying there is no one out there who said anything different. The scholars are agreed. They have unanimously agreed, etc. So when they narrate that ijma', they don't necessarily tell us this is the ijma' and this is the dalil. They just tell us what? This is the ijma'. When we get that ijma' from a credible source, that unanimous agreement from a credible source, we do what? We accept it. And we're not allowed to reject it until what? Until we're handed the dalil. But there's no ijma' without dalil, but acceptance of ijma' is not predicated on knowing the dalil.
Is there a specific reason why they don't give us the dalil? I mean, I'm thinking like because it could become arguments amongst the lay people, or is it not? Or it's just
Sometimes sometimes they do give the dalil, sometimes they don't give the dalil, and it might be because the ijma' is passed down from generations where they knew the dalil because they lived it, like the companions. And they didn't narrate to the people. But the people saw that all the companions were on this what? This opinion. And they passed it down from generation to generation. And so sometimes it becomes a generational thing where we don't know anything different. And so we don't need to know the evidence because it comes all the way back from what? From the original source, if there was any error. So that's sometimes what it is. And sometimes they just don't feel the need to do so. That the ijma', the ulama should be enough for us because the Prophet said, لا تجتمع أمتي على الضلالة. My ummah, my religious community, my followers will not unite or unanimously agree upon anything false. So if they agree upon something, we know it's what? It's truth, yeah. Any other questions? Any other questions going once? Going twice? Zahid, you got anything? We're good. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.